Okay, so Sylvia, do you want to come? I'm going to ask if folks could come up to the podium because we have, that way people online can kind of see you and.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sylvia Bolivar. I'm the Deputy Director of the Baltimore County Department of Housing and Community Development. And I also serve as Vice Chair of the Fair Housing Working Group. Thank you for those of you who are in person and those of you who are joining us virtually. We have approximately 40 people who are participating today, so that is wonderful. So thank you for your time and all the work you do to address all of these pressing community issues that we have to at the local level look to address, since at the federal level, those roles have shifted. So those of you who are in leadership working to address these issues at the local level, I thank you and I look forward to working very closely with all of you. I also want to take a moment to recognize our chair, Kim Zanti, who's here today. Kim, thank you for your leadership, and she has been out for a while, so I'm chairing the meeting today because she's just come back. So thank you for being here today. And then I also would like to start with some introductions, if we can go around the room. And then we can ask those of you who joined us virtually to also introduce yourselves. So with that, start with you.
Good morning, I'm David Prater. I'm Assistant Attorney General, the Maryland Office of Attorney General and the Civil Rights Commission.
Welcome.
Sylvia said, I'm Kim Zanti. I'm the Chief of the Community Planning and Grants Division for Housing.
Good morning, everyone. Anna Cooper, Associate Vice President of Housing from United Way Central Maryland.
Good morning, Danielle Meister, the Assistant Secretary for the Division of Homeless Solutions at Maryland DHCD.
Hi, I'm Elise Thompson. I am the Director of the Office of Tenant and Landlord Affairs at Maryland DHCD.
Hi, I'm Megan Ariano. I work for Baltimore County DHCD. I'm the Fair Housing Program Administrator.
Good morning, Gina Gibson. I'm the Deputy CEO of the Housing Commission of Anne Arundel County.
Good morning, I'm Lenita Hillen. I'm the Executive Assistant and 504 Coordinator for the Housing Commission of Anne Arundel County.
Morning, Frank McMillan. I'm the lead organizer with BUILD. It's a coalition of 50 religious congregations and nonprofits in Baltimore City.
I'm Emily Hovermail. I'm the External Affairs Director at the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership.
I'm Allison Siborowski. I'm the President and CEO of Leading Age Maryland, and we represent about 95 different affordable senior housing communities across the state.
My name is Lee Birdwhistle. I'm the Senior Civil Rights Testing Manager at the Equal Rights Center.
I'm Paul Bacco. I'm an affordable housing planner with Arundel Community Development Services.
I'm Dan Pontius. I'm the Housing Policy Coordinator here at the Baltimore Metropolitan Council.
Wonderful. And then I'm going to ask those of you who joined us virtually to introduce yourselves as well.
We just kind of go around the screen, call on people.
Ada, would you like to start? Asha, I can't read from here. Even with my glasses on.
Sure. Did you say Asha?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm Asha Smith. I am the Director of Equity and Human Rights for Anne Arundel County.
Adam
Skolnick. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association.
Kathleen.
Hi, Kathleen Hughes. I am the Supervising Attorney for the Anne Arundel County Eviction Prevention Legal Program. It's a mouthful. Thanks.
Kevin.
Good morning, Kevin Greenwell, Deputy Director, Housing, Harford County.
Hey, this is Hillary Chapman. I'm the Housing Program Manager at the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments.
Adwa. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing names correctly, so.
I'm Adwa Mawanji. I don't have a position, but I'm going through homelessness.
Jordan.
Roddy, Jordan Gilmore, Policy Director for Maryland DHCD.
Amy?
Hi, good morning. I'm Amy Siegel. I'm one of the supervising attorneys with Community Legal Services.
Lynn?
Hi, Lynn Miller, Anne Arundel, Office of Planning and Zoning.
Charles?
I am Charles Martin, M&T Bank.
Matthew?
Hi, good morning. Matt Pipkin with the Maryland Multi-Housing Association.
Nora?
Oh, hi, Nori Suter with Chief Affordable Housing Officer with Arundel Community Development Services in Arundel County.
Angie?
Hi, I'm Angie McAllister. I'm a Vice President and Deputy Chief Impact Officer at United Way of Central Maryland.
Peter?
Peter Engel, Executive Director of the Howard County Housing Commission, and now very afraid of everybody else.
Cleveland Horton?
Cleveland Horton, Executive Director of the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. Peter, don't be afraid. I got your back. We in here together. I got you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And am I missing anyone else? I'm looking at a screen, so I'm not sure if I missed anyone by chance.
Chuck Cook, Senior Advisor, DHCD.
Aaron Greenfield here on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association.
And
Chelsea Heyman, Deputy Director of Special Populations, DHCD.
Matt Michler, Director of Government Affairs at MDOT, the Secretary's Office.
Susie McClanahan at the Equal Rights Center.
This is Carter Reitman, Housing Planner for the Maryland Department of Planning.
I think.
And Tanika Richardson with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy.
I think we have everyone. Thank you for introducing yourselves. Thank you for being part of this meeting. We have a really robust agenda this morning. We're going to start with legislative updates and a recap of the 2026 General Assembly session. And then we're also, we're really delighted to have Elise with us here today. Elise is going to do a presentation on the Maryland Eviction Dashboard. And I think this is also a wonderful opportunity for people to, in this room and virtually, to really give feedback to Elise as she's working on this dashboard, and she's going to be refining it to give her feedback in terms of the kinds of things that you think you'd like to see reflected in the data. Where are the gaps and what are the opportunities? Not only to have this data further refined, but how we use that data moving forward. So I'm looking forward to that discussion, but why don't we begin with the legislative updates?
And advance the slides here. Here's our Fair Housing Group. These are the jurisdictions that are collaborating with the Fair Housing Group. The jurisdictions and the housing authorities, their fair housing responsibilities. And here's our agenda for today. And so, yeah, let's just jump in. This was a really consequential legislative session. As someone who has done some lobbying in Annapolis a while ago, and also having, we've kind of, as a Fair Housing Group, we've had our eye, working to get fair housing testing, more robust in the region. We've had our eye on this bill to allow audio recording of fair housing tests, which has passed one house but not the other for a few years now. And so we thought it would be useful to kind of learn about the fair housing related legislation that has passed this session. And also in a couple of examples, learn how it happened, because these things are not easy to do. And so as we kind of have one of our regional action steps being making fair housing testing more robust and easier to do and more effective with audio recording, thought it could be useful to kind of hear the stories of how these bills pass. So let's start, and thanks Emily Helmervale from the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership. We work with BRHP on all kinds of things, including our regional project-based voucher program. I've got a slide that sort of has the basics, but why don't you take over and talk to us about how that came to be.
Great, thanks, Dan. So again, my name is Emily Helvermail. I'm the External Affairs Director at the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership. As Dan mentioned, this is legislation that we worked very closely with many organizations on. This was our priority bill this year. I would be remiss to not mention the Renters United Maryland Coalition that we were a part of, and many other groups that were a part of this great success. So this was legislation introduced by Delegate Von Stewart and Senator Love. As Dan mentioned, kind of the basics of what the bill does are there on the screen. Essentially, for those who have an income-based housing subsidy, like a housing choice voucher, a property manager or landlord, whatever, could not consider income aside from that is required to pay the tenant's portion of the rent. The credit score, lack of a credit score, or adverse credit history from before the time that the tenant had a subsidy. And with that, so this is based on the DC law. This is law that has been in place in DC for a few years now. There was some concern expressed in terms of this, specifically the credit history aspect and how one would determine when the tenant had become assisted. So we did add some language that essentially basically outlines some of the permissible ways that you could identify when the subsidy. We were very, very careful not to add any new requirements onto PHAs to say you have to provide something at a certain time. But what it says is that you can verify this from information provided by the applicants, the voucher paperwork, documents provided by the PHA, or a public housing authority's response to a request by the landlord. But it's very clear that there's not a response required from the PHA in order to move forward on that. So just a little bit more detail on that. And then there is this section, this additional section that was added that allows, it requires a property owner, and specifically of 6 units or more, to offer the opportunity for a tenant to report their positive rental history to at least one credit reporting agency. This is actually language that was championed by the chair of the Senate committee. There wasn't specifically a group, or we weren't specifically pushing for this, but I think there was an interest from Chairman Smith, who many may remember from his past championship of the HOME Act in 2020 when he was a delegate, to also include some new credit enhancing opportunities for folks who are assisted. So that is the final component of that. And yes.
Who's responsible for paying for that if it's not one of the free credit reporting agencies?
Yeah, so it could be passed on to the tenant in terms of how it's not required that anyone do it either. It's just required that they make it available, make them aware of the opportunity. So that's to be clear on that as well. That's a good question. If people couldn't hear, the question was about who pays for the credit reporting. So that's the legislation. In terms of how we got here, yeah, we worked, like I said, very closely with a lot of organizations, people also who are in the legal advocacy space, as well as many who are impacted directly by this. And I do think that was a difference maker. We had our advocacy day where we brought our participants to come and speak directly with elected officials. We had participants testifying at every hearing and really scheduling meetings, being a real presence and making their stories known to make this real. I think that was a big part of the success this year, as well as all of the partnership. Again, I'd be remiss to not acknowledge DHCD, the Office of the Attorney General. There was a lot of support for this. And so I think that all of that went a long way. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Hi, it's Nori Suter on the video. I guess I'll go on camera. I have a question about on the rental reporting. I understand from the bill that the DHCD and/or I assume the Office of Tenant and Landlord Affairs is charged with creating some forms for for this, as well as for the criminal history bill? Is that in process?
Okay. Yes, says the director of the Office of Tenant and Landlord.
Any sense on when,
Yeah, right. Exactly. It has passed but not been signed. I should have mentioned that as well. I'm sorry. Yes, I should have said that this hasn't been signed yet. This isn't one of the bills that's been signed yet into law, so. Normal October 1 implementation day. I think there's a hand raise.
Yeah, Cleveland, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm trying to work this technology to get everything straight. So just taking a look at it, just to make sure I'm clear, as we communicate with landlords and housing providers around the credit score piece, the lack of credit score, the adverse credit history from before the tenant had a voucher. So how do we envision that working in practice? So I just want to make sure. So let's say, for instance, if there is a credit score requirement, is it now the responsibility of the landlord or housing provider to go back and determine when that adverse credit happened or impacted their credit score? How do we envision this playing out in real life to make sure that landlords and housing providers aren't violating this piece of this legislation?
Right, I think that's important. So let me make that distinction really clear. You can not use a credit score at all. You can't use the credit score for someone who has an income-based housing subsidy. So it's not, that part has nothing to do with when the voucher started. So we understand that credit events are baked into a credit score, right? So you can't really differentiate, can't really break it out. But the credit report is what will show you all of the adverse credit events. And so they can look at the adverse credit events that occurred before the tenant had a voucher, but not after, because that doesn't represent their current stability, their current financial stability that comes with the voucher. And I will say that this has.
It's the reverse. They can look at it after they had the voucher, but not before.
I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. I did say that. That didn't make sense what I said.
It's fine. I knew what you meant. I knew what you meant.
And I did just want to say too, that this, again, has been the law in DC for years as well. And I think that they have had success in being able to implement in terms of the distinction with the credit score, credit reporting. I'm sorry for flipping that, but you understood.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure I was understanding, because I guess it was my understanding as well that you couldn't take a look at the credit score as well. So I just wanted to, looking at the slide, I thought it was saying something different. So I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. And the credit piece is regardless of the percentage of the voucher, right? So even if it's a 25% voucher, you're not allowed to take a look at the credit score?
Correct. Can't look at the, yes. I see what you mean, that it maybe looks like on the screen that from before the tenant had a voucher applies to all of that.
Right.
Just applies to the adverse credit history.
Cool, no problem. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page. I appreciate it.
Yes. You got it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Tanika.
Hey, Ben. Thanks, Emily. So piggybacking off of Cleveland, you answered part of the question. I guess I'm just also trying to understand how this will work in practice as well. And I know you said before, like, it's not going to necessarily be on the PHAs to supply that information. I guess the law was kind of vague on that. So I guess, again, with the in practice, right? Like if we have a client that's get ready to lease up and the landlord is trying to verify this information, I guess the question is, like, if the PHA is not necessarily required to give it, like what they give it, you know, I guess I have concerns about just like privacy and again, how that works if in practice when the landlord is trying to verify it. You already answered the question about the credit score piece and about the history, because I was going to ask that. But I guess again, in practice, if a landlord actively is trying to verify this information to give somebody a unit, what is the responsibility for the PHA to get?
No, I do understand the question. We wanted to provide as many options as we could think of in terms of how you could verify. And that's why in the bill it delineates you can confirm when the subsidy started through the applicant, through voucher paperwork, documents provided by the PHA, or a request to the PHA. I understand what you're saying, that there may be occasions where a request to the PHA isn't responded to for whatever reason, but hopefully they can, find through their voucher paperwork or other ways to verify that their subsidy, when their subsidy started. And that's why we included so many options.
Voucher paperwork, just speaking from, BRSP, former employee. When we say voucher paperwork, like because even like when we give them a copy of their voucher, it just has the active date. So are we going to be giving clients a copy of their file? Like what exactly is the voucher paperwork that they're given?
We don't have a ton of time to get into the super details of this.
We could take this offline. Yeah, we can talk.
I'll send you an email.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tanika.
Asha, do you have a quick question before?
I did have a quick question. Could you repeat the effective date one more time? I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, it's the standard October 1.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep, of course. Yes, and just final thing, obviously there's much further to discuss, but we'll be including, we're creating some information to include in like our voucher briefings. We'd love to share that with other PHAs. We think it would be helpful to make sure that participants especially are aware of the new protections once they do become law. So as indicated, we have some time before that takes place, but putting a little plug-in out there for making sure folks are aware.
And maybe we should pull together a real robust discussion of this. I mean, it's a super important thing. I mean, I know with our regional project-based voucher program, we've really found that, you can, a landlord can say, oh, we accept vouchers, but then if they apply a credit score, it's just, it really makes it very difficult. So this is, I remember Cleveland actually suggesting, well, if you clarify the law, that would be easier. And you guys actually did it.
We said, let's clarify that law. Yeah, thanks.
All right, great. All right, well, let's move on to the next impressive piece of legislation. This is something that's come up as we've done our fair housing plans. People have suggested that criminal record be a protected class, or that not be, there's obviously racial disparities involved in that. And that always seemed like something that would be very difficult, if not impossible, politically to pass, and yet it passed this year. So we invited Frank to come talk about that, and here are a couple of pictures from a rally in Annapolis and a few of the specifics of the bill. Right.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah. So good morning. I'm Frank McMillan. I'm the lead organizer with BUILD, a coalition of religious congregations and nonprofits in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. We come to this work because we organize with people who are returning citizens themselves. And I think, as you'll see in one of the pictures here, the emphasis that, especially for the people in this room, there are more than 1 million people in the state of Maryland with a record. Right. So this legislation is crucial for the protection of affordable housing and the protection of housing for people across the state. And I think that is a real political constituency of Democrats and Republicans, of people who have a record all across the state. And that was a crucial part of conversations with legislators, reminding them that there's, often 20% of a given jurisdiction that has a record, regardless of where that might be in the state. So this is the second year of advocacy in Maryland. There was a year before that, but we were not involved. I also was a part of the coalition that pushed this and passed it in New Jersey when I was the lead organizer there. But we listened to more than 1,000 people who have a record in Baltimore City and around it. The number one issue for them to get access to get their feet back under them was housing. So we took on some fines and fees issues before that as we built our coalition to take on this issue. I will say last year we got close, but sort of got right to the deadline or crossover deadline, and it was just not going to be possible to get it done. But we got a commitment from Chair Smith to pass it the following year. And so we held him to that and kept conversations going. We attempted to meet with the landlords in the interim between the two sessions, some conversations, but not enough, in my opinion. But we had a broad coalition, including BUILD, VERA, the Public Justice Center, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Life After Release, Renters United Maryland, who really helped push this. But I don't think it would have happened without direct conversations with Senator Ferguson, with Chair Smith, with Chair Valderrama, with Vice Chair Charkoudian, and with our sponsors, Delegate Lewis and Senator Henson, that really helped move this. But I think we were trying to emphasize just the political power that exists, the stories of people who were directly affected that were there, but bringing 300 people with a record to Annapolis early on in the session to say that this is about satisfying the needs of it will be the strongest legislation of its kind in the country. It is DC, Maryland, and New Jersey that have fair chance housing laws across the jurisdiction. And it, as you'll see, it creates a two-step process. Landlords can deny people for certain convictions, first and second degree murder, sexual crimes, human trafficking. Then they can they make a conditional offer to a tenant based on looking at their credit report, all those sorts of things. Employment, once they've made that conditional offer to a tenant, they can then conduct the criminal background check and look at it. They can only consider felonies if the conviction was 5 years ago. If the conviction was longer than that, they cannot consider that. So misdemeanors, landlords cannot consider misdemeanors on their record when they are deciding that. And tenants, if they are denied for their criminal record, there are many leaders in our coalition who have a first or second degree murder conviction. They spent 30 years incarcerated, came home, and are, have a great credit report, have a job, started a business, all those sorts of things. They are able to contest that by offering some examples of what they've done. My ask of this group, though, is that as you hear this, the most crucial thing in New Jersey was enforcement. So making sure that as you are seeing this, as you see landlords advertising that they don't rent to people with criminal records, really reporting that to the Office of Attorney General and to the Office of Tenant Landlord Affairs once it is signed, hopefully, and becomes in practice on October 1st as well. So I will stop there, but I'm very grateful for our coalition partners and then the legislative allies that help make this possible. Yeah.
Quick question. Are there any protections or anything maybe in the pipeline to protect people from Maryland Judiciary Case Search or landlords from utilizing that?
So this would deny their ability to do that, right? They cannot use Case Search if it, again, it doesn't matter, they can look at these things, but they cannot deny people for that. They must give people a reason for their denial, or that it's not their criminal record when they're making a conditional offer, and that's world. But again, it's going to be, there are bills that would eliminate things from Case Search.
That's more what I was
in the future, clean slate, but that does not necessarily get at some of the felony records that we're talking about here.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Not a question, a statement of appreciation. What you didn't highlight that we're particularly excited about in addition to this is not allowing landlords to do any drug testing or substance use testing, and not allowing them to require treatment records or proof of rehabilitation. I think we've shared that in some of the interagency task forces on opioids, and they're really excited about that. So it's a major barrier for a lot of housing opportunities for folks who are in recovery.
I give full credit to Public Justice Center and others that put that part in.
That might be first in the nation. I'm not sure. So worth looking into.
That's great.
Yeah, but they were shocked and were like, I can't believe that made it into a law. So just want to highlight that folks are excited about that at the state level. So.
The debate was about types of crimes. Right. That was the sort of conversation at the legislative level. Any other questions? Again, my ask is deeply to all of you who are dealing with people on the ground and seeing this both education to people and then providing information as you see it to the state and the Office of Attorney General and OTLA. Very grateful for conversations with the Office of Attorney General and with the Secretary during this process as well. So great. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank.
Dan, I think there were some comments on the chat. I saw the box pop up a couple of times. Yeah.
All right. Oh yeah, looks like. Chelsea was asking, how does this impact PHAs? Although was this or that's the last one?
It does impact PHAs. So that requirement on distribution of methamphetamines is a federal requirement. That's why that's included in the upfront, but it applies also to public housing authorities, as I understand.
I don't think it really does, because we already do our screenings for violent criminal activity or drug-related criminal activity and the requirement of the production of methamphetamines. Our look back is 3 years, not 5 years.
Great.
And a lot of times when we are working with landlords and a client may have a criminal record that's not related to drug-related or violent criminal activity, we will talk to the landlord and try to explain to them, you know, because someone has a theft charge or whatever, you know, these misdemeanors are, that these shouldn't count against them with regards to their housing, and talk about the length of time that those have occurred. Our biggest pushback is when a applicant or a tenant who's moving has repeated failure to pay rent notices. And sometimes the tenant goes to court and those are dismissed or ruled in the tenant's favor, where they pay their rent afterwards. If there's a way to get those removed when they shouldn't be on the record, or when the tenant pays their rent prior to those being filed, I think that would go a long way towards tenants being able to rent, because landlords really weigh heavily on those.
I think the other thing for PHA too is there's some federal language in there about murder and some of the charges that we can, you know, never accept somebody. So that might, we might have to look as a PHA at the federal regulations, because obviously that's going to trump state and local. And, you know, it just will need to be understood. Some of those things our hands are tied. We can't change them based on this.
Yeah, and I think those are in the law.
I think they are.
Yeah, I think they were careful to make sure
Okay.
that anything that's statutorily required of PHA is included.
Thankfully not.
There is some eviction case shielding in state law already. It doesn't cover every scenario, but there are some protections already in state law. They automatically get removed from public records.
All right, and then all of this, as we know, is going to take enforcement. So let's just kind of run through, because I don't want to take too much time away from Elise talking about eviction, but just to kind of go through the other legislation that passed. And David's here from the Attorney General's office, but as disparate impact gets kind of chipped away, the federal rule on disparate impact has been repealed. So this bill, House Bill 573, Senate Bill 274, establishes disparate impact in Maryland law. So intent is not as important to prove. And then also authorizes Maryland DHC to issue regulations on Maryland's duty to affirmatively further fair housing, which is now, you know, important given the kind of chipping away at that at the federal level as well. Are there any questions for David on that law? I guess it's pretty straightforward. And then, as I mentioned, the bill that we've been paying attention to, this fair housing testing recording, so that would make it, and actually Frank, you were mentioning to me that testing in New Jersey was important for enforcing the New Jersey criminal background. Right? So, and New Jersey is not a two-party consent.
It's my understanding.
Yeah, so this would create an exception. This has passed the Senate 3 years now. The House Judiciary Committee, there is some sentiment in there that, you know, there's concerns. There are a lot of two-party consent issues that come up there. So this year they actually changed the bill to a task force and passed that, but neither bill passed both houses. I think the Fair Chance Housing Act passed the second house at 10:30 on the last day, right? I think I saw that.
10:57.
So anyway, that's I thought it would be useful for folks to hear about a couple bills that did make it through, you know, and elements of that. So this is something that we've worked on for a few years now. And then there's a couple of bills that were championed by the executive branch, by the DHCD and MDOT. The Housing Certainty Act, which requires local governments to evaluate developments based on the rules in place when the permit application was submitted, and delaying the time when local governments can collect the impact fees and excise taxes until after construction is complete, so just before they're about to collect rent. And then the Transit and Housing Opportunity Act, which promotes, again, sort of, well, it kind of directs local governments to have mixed use zoning within a half mile of rail transit stations with a decent amount of service, and restricts local government's ability to set off-street parking minimums, and otherwise kind of restrict development right around transit stations. So I don't know if folks have questions about that. Chuck Cook is online, and Michler as well from MDOT. Are there any questions about those bills?
Dan, can I do a little clarification on your 2 bullet points there?
Sure.
Yeah, so we have requires local governments to evaluate full housing development permit applications based on the laws and regulations. It actually precludes local governments from changing land use laws after a complete application has been submitted. So this would end the issue around the state of Maryland of late vesting, right? So right now, under because of Maryland case law, not actually anything that's in code, you can start construction, you can dig the foundation of a building, and as long as I, an average citizen, am on the street and it cannot visibly see construction happening yet, so it hasn't gone up above the mound, we can change land use regulations and kill the project. So a developer could be 18 months into a project and suddenly it's downzoned by a local government. And this bill stops that. You vest at the time that you put the complete application in, and land use rules on the ground at that point in time are locked in. So it puts the onus on local government to zone the areas that they want zoned, and follow their comp plans so that the rules are the same no matter what. As soon as we apply, I look at a piece of land and say, hey, I'm putting an application to build in right here, and I'm following everything that you have in your comp plan on this property by zoning, by setbacks, by everything. And when you accept that application, those rules are kind of locked in for 5 years to ensure that you've got enough time to complete the project with the existing rules on the ground. And this is the second year that we've run this bill, and we got it through. We see it as an incredibly important part in ensuring that there's a level of affordability, and more importantly, like it says in the name, a certain level of certainty for developers, especially nonprofit developers that don't have a lot of capital to put at risk, knowing as they're going into the process, they have a level of certainty that they'll be able to complete the project with the existing rules that they applied under. So I just wanted to kind of give more of a sales pitch there for you, if you don't mind.
All right. Any other questions about, or any questions about either of these bills? All right, well, then we can move on to Elise. Do you want to come up and here, let me get up your slides here. I think you can just kind of click through here, this arrow, or by clicking on this as well. Okay, all right, and thanks. So Elise spoke before this group in October, just kind of introducing her office, but we really wanted to dig into eviction data and how we can be using that as well. So thanks very much, Elise, for joining us.
So before I begin the presentation, I just wanted to give you all some big picture context about the eviction data. I have been having a lot of conversations with folks all across the state, and many people are surprised at the existence of the eviction data. I think it's not necessarily very widely known that DHCD receives this data from the judiciary and makes it publicly available to folks. And I wanted to say that, we imagine this as a series of conversations about the eviction data. We are in the process of overhauling the dashboard that we currently use, and we have sought out grant funding in order to expand the level of eviction data that we currently have in the state. And regardless of whether we get those funds, DHCD is committed to really understanding how our partners in the community use data, use the eviction data to sort of inform what they're doing locally. And also we want to understand, to the extent that we have certain eviction data, we would like to understand what other data would be helpful to try to gather, so that we are providing our partners with useful data that can inform policies on a local level. In general, eviction data is not very widely collected across the state. Maryland is probably the furthest along than any state in the country with regards to actually collecting data about eviction and having some insight into what's happening in with regards to eviction in communities across the state. Since collecting the data and analyzing the data, it is we see routinely that the outcomes aren't necessarily what you would expect. And so we hope that by putting the data out there, it actually helps us to think better about how we are supporting renter households across the state. So like I said, this is really an introduction to the eviction process. I know some of you all are experts who do that day in and day out every single day, but I didn't want to assume people's baseline understanding. So I'm going to go over just a very high level, what does the eviction process look like in Maryland? Then we're going to look at the eviction dashboard itself so that you become familiar with it. Then we're going to talk about the data that we have collected, the data that we collect, and the numbers for jurisdictions in this room. And then I also hope to talk about, the things that we know the areas where we know the data is lacking. And at the end, I would love your feedback, but like I said, we envision this as a series of conversations. And so what I would really love is for folks to actually also go back to their communities, dig more deeply into the eviction data, drill down to the zip code level and see what's happening where in your communities. And so that we can have a set baseline as we continue the conversation about how can eviction data help you carry out your respective missions. So that said, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So just to begin, the eviction process in Maryland begins with the notice of intent to file for eviction. Landlords have to send that out to tenants 10 days before they can file it. The NOI process happens entirely outside of the court system, although the court does create the notice that it must be used. And so it's a standard form for everyone across the state. So generally, if a person misses their rent on day one, they can then, the landlord is then sending out the notice to file for eviction in 10 days. In general, Maryland has very much a strong, a strong culture of using the eviction process as a rent collection tool. That is definitely the case with NOI. It goes out, from my understanding, very routinely at the very beginning. And it goes out in conversations that we've had with landlords. They estimate that, only about 1 in 10 or 10% of the people who receive NOIs actually have evictions filed against them. So I just want to say, it's very broadly used. When a landlord, after the NOI and after the 10-day wait period, a landlord then files for eviction in court. They are typically filing a specific, they're making a specific allegation when they do file. These are 4 options that are most commonly used in filing for eviction in the state. I will say, if a tenant is holding over, for example, the landlord is making the allegation that the tenant refused to leave a property after the lease ends. For breach of lease, the landlord is alleging that the tenant has violated the lease for some reason other than non-payment of rent. For failure to pay rent, the landlord is simply saying the tenant hasn't paid rent. And in Maryland, that failure to pay rent failure to pay rent accounts for nearly 90% of all eviction filings. And then wrongful detainer, this is where you have a non-lawful resident overstaying their welcome. They could be someone who is actively invited into the home, who won't leave, or it could be someone who, as the news has been very prominent lately about squatters. So this would be the type of action that you file in that case. Once the eviction has been filed, then the court issues a summons with a scheduled court date. The sheriff or the constable, some counties use sheriffs, some counties use constables, who are typically under the control of the judiciary, whereas sheriffs tend to be are a separate entity. They are responsible for delivering or posting the summons on the property. Under Maryland law, technically, you are supposed to have a court date 5 days after the summons. Most counties do not comply with that. Anne Arundel County is one that insists that court dates happen 5 days later. And as a result of that, evictions in Anne Arundel County happen much faster than other jurisdictions. Other jurisdictions, the sheriffs are basically like, it's not really possible for us to provide to deliver the summons in the 5-day window of time. And so they basically refuse to comply with the law as written. And so there's a lot of variation from county to county in terms of when the court date is actually scheduled. When they have the scheduled court date, when the court date happens, essentially the court can issue a judgment for possession. That is essentially means that the judge has found in favor of the landlord and the tenant's legal right to occupy the property ends. This is a warrant, it's called a warrant for restitution. That under Maryland law, the tenant has 7 days to vacate the property. They do have the option of getting more time if, for example, they can get a physician's note saying that they need more time in order to move for health reasons. If the tenant doesn't move within that window of time, the landlord has to proactively go back to court. And they have to go back to court within 60 days to get permission for the sheriff to forcibly evict the family. I'm sorry, that is the writ of restitution. Thank you, slides, for knowing. And so that then directs the sheriff, the constable to move forward with the eviction. If the landlord does not proactively go back to court within 60 days, they are their right to evict expires. And so then they have to start the process all over again. Eviction is after the landlord goes back to court, gets permission to actually effectuate the eviction, then the eviction is scheduled by the sheriff or the constable. They have to provide notice at least 6 days in advance of the eviction. 6 days, this is where it gets kind of wonky in the law, but the standard is 6 days under Maryland law. But the law also includes the authority for local jurisdictions to adjust the timing. And it has to be between 4 days and 14 days. So the minimum is 6, unless your jurisdiction gives you less time or more time. When the sheriff comes for the eviction, they are asked to verify that certain conditions have been met. There are generally standards about, like how much staff need to be present to help carry out the eviction. The sheriffs are typically there for safety. They're not actually the ones who are, doing the work of removing people's properties and things like that. That is typically the responsible of the landlord. There are expectations about how many people you have to move people's belongings out and things like that. Their sheriff is also checking for that certain requirements were met. If the sheriff doesn't think that they were, they can actually go back and petition the court and say, the landlord didn't meet certain requirements, and so we didn't move forward with the eviction. And a lot of that's related to notice. You know, did the landlord actually provide the notice they were supposed to provide? And so if that is the case, then you sort of go back a couple of steps for the landlord to provide the notice or to meet whatever requirements they didn't meet, and then you kind of try again. But that is the sort of big picture landscape of eviction. And I will say a lot of this reflects the law as it's written. That does not necessarily mean that is how it actually works in practice. Because like I said, even for example, with like, there are 5 days, you get 5 days before you can, before you have to show up in court. Obviously, like I said, what happens in practice can vary significantly from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So just keep that in mind. So when we're looking at the eviction data, the data that we collect is prescribed by state law. That's part of the reason why Maryland is further ahead than every other state. It's because we have legislation that dictates what the judiciary sends to DHCD on a monthly basis. I will say there was a new law that went into effect October 1 of last year, and that data is highlighted. Those specific data points are highlighted in bold here. These are things that have not yet been incorporated into the eviction dashboard. This is a big part of why we are proactively updating the dashboard so that we can incorporate these new data points and make the dashboard more user-friendly. But we are getting information about the landlord name, the full address, the filing date, the type of eviction. We're getting a lot more data about what happened at the hearing in terms of, did the tenant show up? Did they have legal representation? Was the right of redemption foreclosed? One of the things I didn't mention in the whole eviction process was that up until from the start of the process till the date that, you know, the sheriff carries out the eviction under Maryland law, tenants have the opportunity to pay their past due rent and stay in the property. There's a certain point where if you've had too many eviction filings in the last 12 months, you could lose your ability to pay your past due rent, and you can be evicted even if you do pay. But that is, I think for most states, for most jurisdictions, I believe it's 3 times in a 12-year period. Baltimore City has a different number.
12 months. You said 12-year.
Oh, yeah, 12 months, thank you. And there's a different number in Baltimore City. So it does vary a little bit from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. The judiciary under the law is supposed to collect and compile the data, share it monthly with DHCD in a manner required by the department. You know, to the extent that the data is incomplete or there are inaccuracies, we go back and have a conversation and ask them to explain what's going on. They, you know, clean up data, send it back to us, things like that. DHCD is responsible for organizing and formatting the data, publishing it up online, updating it monthly, making the data available for other governmental entities, academic institutions. And then we also review and analyze the data annually and provide a report to the General Assembly. So this is a screenshot of the dashboard. The landing page has a lot of background information so that people who are coming to this data understand, you know, some of the technical legal terms. We explain the technical legal terms, information about the filing type, information about the eviction process, to provide people with context and background information. We recognize that everyone working in the eviction space doesn't necessarily have the specific legal background. And so we want to make sure, you know, we needed to include a lot of explanation to make sure that people understood the data that they were looking at. And we also wanted to provide a lot of context because the data does have some limitations. We will talk about that, but some things that I wanted to flag was that you can come to this website, and although we do put it in this dashboard format to help you to easily access it, you can just directly download the data from the website directly. So the data is truly accessible to anyone, and you can, if you have the data expertise on staff, you can absolutely, pull it down, try and hack the data and chop it apart in whatever ways that make sense for you, and look at it in other formats. But if you don't have data expertise in staff, we do, the dashboard is supposed to make it easier for you to access the data. There are some certain things I want to flag in the data. First of all, in the top right corner, you see the report period. There is a lag between when we get the data from the judiciary. So this was updated for, we get it about a month later, and then our internal team spends some time reviewing the data, flagging questions if there are any for judiciary, doing a little bit of cleanup, and then loading it into the system. So this was actually just updated last Friday for this presentation. So I want to flag that there is a significant delay in when the data comes out. You can see that you can filter by month and year. You can filter by filing type. You can filter by jurisdiction. You can filter by zip code. We do recognize that, not all geographic boundaries are neatly fall into county lines. And so to the extent that you're trying to target in on specific areas, you can do that to some degree with what we already have. The other thing that I want to flag is that this data is the data that the judiciary is required to provide are the warrants of restitutions. So we're getting the data where the judge has formally declared that an eviction should go forward or can go forward, and the tenant no longer has the legal right to occupy the property. So if you can recall from talking through all of the steps earlier, there's a lot of data that the judiciary is not required to give to us. And we are really getting data at the very end stages of the process. We can tell you, but as you can see, you do get the number of warrants of restitution that were filed, how many were canceled or expired. We don't know if they are canceled because the tenant paid rent, or if they're canceled because the tenant voluntarily moved out. All we know is that the landlord never came back, either came back and said, we no longer need the sheriff to evict, or they let the 60 days lapse. We don't know which scenario it was, or we don't know any of the things that could have happened. So that kind of throws things off. And then we get data on the number of actually carried out evictions. The carried out evictions part is interesting because sheriffs are the ones who report back to the judiciary, and then the judiciary updates their logs essentially, and the sheriffs all report in different ways at different times through different systems, and there is no set lag. When I was pulling all of this together, I saw, for example, the report that we created for the General Assembly last year. We said there were this number of evictions last year. That number is no longer accurate because of the long tail of the reporting from the sheriff's office. So that number is actually slightly different than it was when we prepared our report last year. So you should know that even as we look at these numbers, and even as we look at the data for your specific jurisdictions today, there is absolutely the eviction number in particular, because of how that data is collected. It might not necessarily be the real number.
So I have a quick question. Can you go back to the slide?
Yeah.
So the three numbers that you have, there's a difference of almost 100,000 people or evictions that are missing in there. Is that the lag that you are talking about? Because if you take the 400 warrants of restitutions that are filed with the outcome of the canceled and expired, the outcome of evicted plus the outcome of expired should equal the warrants of restitution. But there's a difference of about 100,000 there. So are all those numbers aggregate numbers and are subject to change based upon the reports that you receive?
That's a very good question, and I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I will say there are many opportunities for lag in the system. So like, for example, you could have issued a warrant of restitution and we haven't yet reached the 60-day expired. So it might still be completely open, but the person has neither been, the actual warrant of restitution hasn't been canceled. It hasn't reached the 60-day expiration date. It hasn't reached the eviction yet. I will also say that this data is all of the data we have received from the judiciary since they began reporting to us. And going back further in time, the data is less good, in part because the Maryland judiciary hadn't started electronic filing yet. And so there is not always, there were a lot more error when it relied on clerks hand typing in all of the details. And in terms of like, did things actually get matched up in the system? But truly, that is a very valid data question in terms of what happens at every stage of the process.
The one thing I'd add, Elise, is that multiple warrants can be issued in the same case.
Oh, yes.
So it probably is not a huge contributing factor to why there's a delta there, but that is one of the things we learned is
yes,
there are some circumstances where the judge might issue multiple warrants of restitution in the same case. So you may always see more. I don't know the numbers will ever, they should never be expected to match or add up.
Yeah.
Because of different case level circumstances.
102,000 is pretty significant.
Yes.
Yeah, and I will say, one of the things that we learned in talking with the judiciary was that, for example, a landlord could come in too soon. And like say the day after their case has, they were awarded their warrant of restitution, they could come in tomorrow and try to file for, we know from judiciary that there are duplicates in the data that essentially reflect like landlord filing errors. And so they may have there may be repeats in both, in the data just in general because of that. One example that they gave us was like landlords coming in too soon to request an eviction and then being denied and then them coming back on the same record that might show up twice as a warrant in that case. And we'll get to this a little bit more down the road, just in terms of like understanding what the data inputs are.
So quick question, I just want to clarify. So Maryland has a habit of stacking charges in general because they like people to plead out and all that fun stuff. Is that what you're talking about with this too? So someone can put in multiple evictions and instead of it coming up as one eviction, it's now coming up as 5?
I'm talking about after the eviction has been awarded, and then the tenant has, say, 5 days or 7 days to move out voluntarily. A landlord could come in on day 3 and request the warrant for restitution to initiate the eviction process with the sheriff. And they could come in on day 3 and the judge will say, no, it's too soon. You can't file for this until day 7. And that's still in the data, them having filed and requested it. So like, they can have requested it and it could have been denied, but it's still there in our data.
Okay.
And then they come back in again another time. And so now you've got 2 warrant of restitutions associated with the same case. And we don't get information from the judiciary about like, this one was approved, this one was denied. We just get a number.
Thank you.
It seems like an issue with The clerk's office though, that they shouldn't be accepted because ultimately it goes on the client's record and it creates an issue for future leasing. So if it's too soon to file an eviction notice, it shouldn't even be allowed to be filed. That
I think it's more, I get the sense it's more of a data management issue than it shows up in case search. So, or on an eviction record that a landlord might pull. It's like a literal issue with their case management system and how it exports data to us. I don't get the sense from the conversations I've been part of that there's actual multiple entries against the tenant. It's like a back-end data management issue. The other thing I just would note for timeline is last year when we looked at the lag time for reporting of data, on average, almost 60 days elapsed between when an eviction occurred and when the data was entered into the case management system for the judiciary. There's a really large amount of burden on the judiciary to do manual data entry around this. So often you have 2 months just to get the eviction data into the court system. Then there's another amount of lag time that's related to them pulling the data, sending it to us, cleaning it. So that does account for a lot of the discrepancy in cases that aren't showing up yet in the data, as you're several months behind generally.
It sounds like HUD's PIC system.
Yeah, it's not too dissimilar. Yeah. It has its challenges for sure.
Just looking at the map thing, when you dig into it, and like you can see the total number of evictions compared to number of rental households in a jurisdiction. Will y'all track that? I mean, I recognize the data issues you're talking about, but like Essex has 1,600 evictions and only 6,000 something rental households. That's a huge number of, or percentage of their rental households that are being evicted. Like not just, and more warrants restitution issued than there are tenants. So like, I
Baltimore
think.
County,
In
their
Baltimore
data
County.
last year, they had more eviction filings than they did renter households. Yeah.
Like, I think that would be really interesting, particularly for people in our position of how do we talk to counties and cities about what are they doing to hold landlords accountable? Cause that, I mean, we have a congregation right in the heart of Essex that I imagine has experienced a lot of this. So.
Yeah, I just wanna, I might be talking out of turn, but when we tried to get this law passed, and it's really public justice and, you know, a group of advocates that tried to get this passed, there was a lot of resistance to even doing this because of some of the things that we are discussing about the data, the lag time. There is no standardization across the state about how jurisdictions collect this data and what the judiciary does and then what the sheriff's office does. So there was a lot of chaos to be like, hey, we can't do this. It's just too complicated. So I just really want us to think about, like, if, you know, I know Alice, I'm really glad to have you on board, and Danielle, that we really think about how do we reduce the number of evictions in the state of Maryland, and that we really figure out what is the strategy, what is the one thing that would pull us all together, and like, because reducing the number of evictions in the state of Maryland would help landlords and help tenants. And we've really got to figure out on that, like, and I know people like, they start to drill down about numbers and adding up, and it's like, no, we could be a better state if we could reduce the number of evictions. I don't know, even by 25%. And jurisdictions, and, you know, hey, let's go after 50% in the next 5 years. But to really think about looking at these numbers, what are we seeing? I also think that the impact of eviction filings on people's records, like, we can address that. We really need to address that. It's like, hey, these folks were, you know, they have eviction filings, they were never evicted, they did everything that they were supposed to do. This is a category of people that we could actually help, and it would help our state. So I just, going back, 5 years ago when we were trying to pass this law, the judiciary said, oh, wait, we can't do this. This is way too complicated. The numbers are never gonna add up. We don't have the staff to do this. And they were also in the process of automating, right? At that point of automating the whole judiciary system. So there was a lot of resistance, and I think it didn't pass twice before we actually were able to get a law passed, maybe even 3 times. But let's not try to get everything to add up. Let's try to focus on what some of the policies that we could actually have an impact on, and what, 60,000 people evicted, hey, what does that mean? What does that mean for those jurisdictions? How could it be better? How could we, really address some of those concerns? I hope that we can stay focused on that.
Do you want to introduce yourself, Claudia?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Claudia Wilson Randall. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Network of Maryland.
I think we do want to focus on, but I think Claudia's pointing out the right thing, which is ultimately all this discussion about data should lead to policy change, right? And the data has been really helpful. So I'll just give an example. The Renters' Rights and Stabilization Act, which passed a couple years ago, that increased eviction filing fees. And since then, we've seen a 9% drop in evictions. And so we're able to track that, and we can measure how does policy change actually impact this. I do say drilling into the data and the gaps in it is helpful, because ultimately, I think we want to get to the point where we have real-time eviction data that can guide the deployment of legal services and rental assistance and real-time interventions. But we'll never get there if we don't address some of the systems issues in the background, like the format in which sheriffs have to report data to the courts, how quickly everyone has to return that data to the courts. So I think it's a both and, right? Like ultimately the goal is policy change, but to be able to measure impact of that, we'll have to fix some of these underlying challenges. But I will say, like, we're so much further ahead than we were a few years ago. This did not exist. We didn't know this data. So I think it's been a huge improvement area, but there's a lot more work to do.
All right, as a data nerd, I love how you phrase that. Thank you so much for explaining it that way.
And we spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Shanika?
Yes. So on this topic, and I'm gonna just keep it short, and I know it would take legislation to do it. This is someone who has worked on the front lines. When it comes to trying to, like how you guys were saying, there's more eviction filings than there are rental units. Has anyone ever thought about why is it that in the state of Maryland that we allow landlords to file for eviction the same month that the rent is due? Right? It's like we are allowing landlords to double dip. So I know that we got past the 10-day, they got to get 10-day notice. Okay, but on day 11, they can go to court to file, right? Because it looks like, looking at this dashboard, half are filed. I mean, half are dismissed or canceled for whatever reason, most likely because people do pay, right? So it's like landlords almost get to double dip a little bit. Like they get to file eviction for the same month. Like how can you file eviction? Say, for example, you want to file eviction in May, saying I didn't pay rent in May, but it's still May. And then on top of that, tenants are also getting hit with the late fee in addition to dealing with the eviction filings and all the ramifications of that, right? So even on the federal level, when it comes to bills, like our bills on our credit report, they can't report late until it's at least 30 days late. And so the life of me, I'm not understanding why is that not the case here? Because a lot of the bills that we pass, like expungement and shielding after 6 months, like none of that would even have to come into play if we simply just put something in place to be like, hey, you cannot file eviction for rent the same month that the rent is due. That's the purpose of the late fee. If they don't pay by the 5th, hit them with the late fee, right? But how can you file eviction saying that a tenant didn't pay when it's still that month? Shit, maybe they might pay the following month. I mean, the following paycheck or whatever. Like, I don't understand that. And I think as a coalition and as a group, we need to have a conversation about that, because to me, that is a common sense bill.
Yeah, can I jump in? Because and my name's Adam Skolnick again, and God forbid I actually represent the people that supply the housing that you guys are throwing under the bus repeatedly. So we represent the people that own and manage professional apartment communities, right? Over 215,000 units in the state of Maryland. And I couldn't agree with, or disagree depending on the issue more. I think, the biggest decrease, and the data that's supplied, of course, is from 23, because that's when e-filing was finalized by the judiciary and the data could be gleaned, professionally. The invariable issue is the 10-day notice that was passed into law that we worked with everybody on and agreed to has dramatically decreased the number of failure to pay rent filings in the state. And if we go back previous to that, you'll find a huge drop off in that number. And I think that that's been a real, it's been a real positive change to the state of Maryland's methodology. The other fix to all of this is more rental assistance. Let's not kid ourselves, right? One of the reasons I disagree with Tanika in terms of the filing process is that if a eviction right now from stem to stern, from filing to the time the person's put out, takes between 60 and 90 days, depending on the jurisdiction. And in the three heaviest filing jurisdictions, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, and Baltimore City, it's taking closer to 90 days than it is to 60 days. So there's only a wait. There's only a delay. If we wait until the end of the month and you can only file after that, it's just dragging out the process. And when it's all said and done, delinquent rent in an apartment community only drives up the rent for the people that are paying their rent on time. It's similar to the filing fee, right? The filing fee went up from $9 to $50 or $60, depending on the jurisdiction, and is now non-recoverable, right? So literally, Maryland is the first state in the entire country to make any type of filing fee that the victor in a case can't recoup the fee. Okay, all that's doing is driving up rent, right? Because invariably, a professionally managed apartment community, the only real revenue they have, as opposed to other businesses, the only real revenue has is rent. So if they can't even recoup the fee that they are having to pay, how else can they recoup that other than raising rent? So I think there needs to be some level of logical dialogue with all these groups about what is the best housing policy, not just eviction policy, okay, but what is the best policy for housing in general? And I'm sure we can come to some agreements on a bunch of it, but there are certain things where, the state putting more money into rental assistance helps everybody, right? It helps tenants, it helps landlords. That's a good thing. But you want to talk about a twist your arm kind of thing. Now, I understand we have budget deficits, but here's a situation where we should be this is a put your money where your mouth is situation. If you have poor people who can't pay their rent, let's make sure we get the rent out on the street. And it's taking forever to do now. It took forever to do during COVID. These are the problems that we have. So let's sometimes not just throw the people that provide good, safe, affordable housing under the bus. Sorry to pontificate, but sometimes I can't help it.
What do you want to kind of run through? It says 11:20, so just.
We are gonna go through it super quickly. I just wanted to flag, there is a different page here. This is old data. I didn't realize we didn't update this, so don't look too closely. I just wanted to pull out the data for the organization, the jurisdictions in the room. I also included Montgomery County and Prince George's County, just to provide additional context. The jurisdictions, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County make up about 75 or 80% of evictions in the state of Maryland. So there's a very big difference between those jurisdictions and everywhere else. Baltimore City has the most, Baltimore County has the most, by far, as has been noted, more evictions than the number of renter households. And then it goes Baltimore City, Prince George's County, and then Montgomery County is the outlier. I did not bring in demographic information, but we have looked at it before. And the sort of the most important demographic information is surprisingly similar across all of the jurisdictions in terms of what percentage of the residents are housing cost burdened. The percentages are actually quite similar between the four jurisdictions, and there's still a very significant difference in the data. So I pulled out data from FY 25, which is July 1st to June 30th. Then I also added the percentages so you could see it in context, like how much eviction is happening in each of these jurisdictions relative to the statewide total. Then I also wanted to look at what are the numbers saying right now. So I pulled out the data from the fourth column is data from June 1st to the most recent data that we have, which is March 31st. And then to make it a fair comparison, I pulled out the eviction data from that same period of time for the previous year. It's important when talking about eviction data to compare the same periods of time because evictions are cyclical, typically increasing during the winter and the summer months when households also have high utility costs. And so this keeps the comparison more stable or more fair. And in general, eviction is trending down across the state, which I was actually surprised by. So, you know, when we talk about why that is, I think that's a very, very valid question to explore. The range is very different across jurisdictions. And so like understanding why is there a 31% decrease in Montgomery County versus only a 2% in Baltimore City or 3% in Baltimore City? These are all very valid questions to explore that could in fact inform policy decisions both in local jurisdictions and across the state.
I know we are very limited on time, but I'm just curious, is age something that you look at in terms of the demographics that are collected?
No. So that's the, so we also have, that was the last page was warrant of restitutions. This page is completed evictions. And again, because of obviously there can be differences between the two. I did pull this out so that it's available. I assume this PowerPoint will be circulated so everyone will have the data and can look at what's happening locally. But I wanted to point out what this data doesn't tell us. So the first thing to keep in mind when considering this eviction data is that this data reflects the judiciary's case management needs. It is about managing the flow of cases that come in. It's not about collecting data because it is relevant for policymakers or could help inform the work that we do on the ground. So that means like fundamentally there are real limitations to what we can get at from this data. So that is, you know, like we're not getting from judiciary you know, race, age, familial status, that sort of information. And so I just want to flag a few things, like we don't have data on the number of households that receive a notice of intent. In previous conversations through the Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force, we've been told, you know, like I said earlier, 10% of NOIs issued become eviction filings, which in Maryland, if the eviction filings are down to, you know, in the 400,000 range, we're talking 4 million notice of intents sent out to residents every year. We don't have information about how many households are able to pay back rent and stay in properties. We don't know how much back rent is owed. That is one thing the judiciary has told us that they receive requests for information about all the time, and they don't remotely collect it, don't care about collecting it, think it's too difficult to collect and has no intention of ever collecting it. We don't know how long it takes to carry out an eviction in any of these jurisdictions. I'm sure local attorneys have this information, landlords probably have this information, but it's not in the eviction data. And we don't know who is at risk of eviction today, right now. In this moment in time, who needs help and intervention and what kind of help and intervention they need. So it's, you know, because of the lags, this is not instantaneous data that, you know, helps us to get resources to the right people at the right moment in time. So when we think about the eviction data, I want to flag that yes, we do have this source of information from the judiciary. We do know that we could get more data from the judiciary. They collect more data than what is required under law. So like they also have information on eviction filings. So we could see how many eviction filings are like how does it work throughout the process? We could get case data from earlier than we have currently. We don't know what other data is out there, but I think realistically, it helps us to know, hearing your questions about what would be helpful, helps to inform us as we work on improving eviction data. What information do we need? What data do we need to try to source? Like we do have some idea about race, how race happens in evictions in Maryland because of, like, for example, the ERAP program, where we could collect some other information, but that's not necessarily in this data set, and obviously not going forward. But we do have some idea about race and eviction and familial status because of that. Andrea?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask about children in these households, if you're able to figure that out.
Danielle, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, so I'd say basically we have zero demographic data whatsoever on any household that faces eviction. Now there's some extrapolation that can happen. So one good thing about this data is it's address level data. So we have the ability theoretically to attach this to census data and draw some conclusions around demographics and household types. But none of the data that the judiciary does not collect demographic data, so therefore can't report any demographic data to us. So I'd say that's the hardest thing. But generally, the data we do have on like our rental assistance programs is the vast majority of people who apply for and then receive rental assistance are families with children, typically headed by a Black mother. So it's about 75% fall in that very specific category. And that kind of matches national trends that have been by Eviction Lab.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask about looking at other data and matching it up.
So how do we go about getting that additional data in terms of demographics? What is that step? Is that conversations with the judiciary? Is that at the elected level where they enact legislation to require them to do that? I think those are the kinds of questions so that we know how to go about it. Because in order to inform public policy and look at, seeking additional funding for rental assistance or case management, or, if there are children at risk, then we need to know how many children are at risk and what we need to do to provide those services to them in real time. So I'm just trying to figure out how to problem solve.
I think there's a couple layers. So one is theoretically, you could pass a law that would require the judiciary to collect that in a filing. The challenge is, does the landlord know those details? Because the filing is made by the landlord. Does the landlord know the racial demographics of the household? They theoretically should know how many people live there. I think that should be knowable from the lease information, but often they may not know the demographics, things like age or disability status of household members. So I think you could pass a law. The question is, how good would the data be, given that the burden is on the landlord to do the collection? Because I imagine most property managers don't know their tenants that well. I also would argue that, maybe not argue is the right word. I would say one red flag I would have is, should landlords collect that information? Because it could start to put them in a fair housing issue context, right? Like if they're asking about age and disability status, does that then, if they make an adverse decision about housing or they go to terminate a lease, does that open them up to accidentally or intentionally doing some kind of racial discrimination or disability discrimination? Because once you know, you can't unknow. And then bias can start to filter in. So it could have broader implications to ask landlords to do that. I think it creates more risk for fair housing discrimination potentially, but.
I would just add, Danielle, that you could absolutely require that information from the landlords on the back end. And so that has nothing to do with leasing on the front end. But a landlord, there's no reason why potentially, if they're going to go through all this process, that they can't be asked to complete that information as well on the back end.
I think this is a very good conversation to have. I would say we do get lots of complaints from tenants about their landlords discriminating against them after they have moved into the housing. So that's my only concern, right, is like, how do you, if you're increasing property manager awareness of disability status, does that create a weird dynamic that might not have existed otherwise, maybe? But yeah, I totally get your point about, you know, there's a difference between asking before lease up, post lease up, and then post lease up.
Or just for the eviction process, purely for the eviction process.
Right.
How much other data do we already have? You know, I just statewide, I mean, the housing stability issue shows up everywhere, right? It shows up in the indicators of poverty studies that the blueprint for education did. I mean, that's high rates of eviction around schools. You know, we're seeing that. Food insecurity, you know, so we're seeing the data in a lot of places that are the same and are the same areas. I mean, and again, you know, I'm not, you know, like GIS mapping every single report from every single agency, but there's a, you know, human services, there's a lot of parallels that we see in terms of zip codes and some areas of the counties. And that's not incidental, like we actually have zip code level data in there. And so there is some, in my mind, extrapolation that could also be done. You know, it's done all the time when Rent-A-Center decides to locate in a particular location, they're using that same data about who lives there. And so I just, you know, I think there's other data and other state data that could help inform the number of children and all of that. And now we have the community schools rental assistance program that also could inform some of that data. So it's imperfect, right? You know, for those of, you know, people who want like perfect data and perfect data sets, it's imperfect, but I do think that there are some data sets that already exist that could inform the where and the who. I would also say the work that was done on longevity in Maryland, the number of older adults, where they are, where they're concentrated, you know, all of that stuff is, you know, right there with zip code level precision.
May I add that if you create more of an administrative burden for landlords to file these notices, what's going to happen, and it's happened before, is that they start to raise rents to price people out so that they don't have to deal with these issues. So we have to be very careful with regards to how much we expect landlords to do administratively. That's not something required for them to be able to lease or to provide housing for persons who have an affordable subsidy. Because what we're doing is pricing people out, because that's what ultimately happens. Landlords get tired of having to jump through hoops for being able to file processes, and they raise the rents.
Why don't we, since I think we're at 11:30, so maybe we should wrap up now. But it sounds like there's a lot of stuff. We should think about ways to follow up if there are people who are particularly interested in digging into this in a small group, perhaps, you know, I don't know, mark on the sign up sheet or put it in the chat or something like that. And do you have anything, any closing thoughts?
No, I just want to reiterate what I said at the beginning, which is that, you know, we expect this to be a ongoing conversation. And like I said, we want to create a dashboard that meets your needs. And so we want to understand more about what your needs are, how you could envision using this data, what questions you have that the data doesn't answer, so that we can start looking at, are there ways that we can like help dig up that data and incorporate it into the dashboard.
So is there any email address, or where would you like for those in the room who'd like to provide you that feedback? How would you like to receive it?
Folks can email me directly.
Yeah, it's like Elise.Thompson@maryland.gov. Is that what ALYCE
Yes.
Thompson?
I can add it to the end of the PowerPoint if folks want that. So that you all, when you get the PowerPoint and look through it all, you will have that contact.
Yeah, that sounds great, and I can send it out to our list too. I'm really, the numbers about Montgomery County having evictions way lower than the other three jurisdictions is like, is that just because they have a ton more rental assistance? Like,
So we don't know, like.
That would be
that's-
really
That's
interesting
part
to
of
dig
our
into.
mission, we're going on a fact
I
finding.
mean, that's like a
mission this
success story right in the data there,
And we can have them at one of our future meetings.
right?
Present.
And speaking of other jurisdictions, our next idea is, this is an idea the Fair Housing Group came up with in our retreat last fall, is a field trip, a summer field trip to Alexandria. So I don't know if there's a whole lot of interest in that, but we sort of tentatively have July 7th. We could move that around. The new acting director of housing in Alexandria is Aspasia Shipolia, who used to be the director at Prince George's County, and we did a lot of talking with her during COVID when we were all figuring out how to stand up rental assistance programs from scratch. And she would love to have us. They have set housing targets for production of housing. They set their own target. Then Washcog set a metropolitan Washington target in 2019. And so Alexandria raised their target and met that target as well. So they've been doing a bunch of housing production there. They passed a zoning for housing bill, I believe, that kind of legalized ADUs. So they've done a number of interesting things that we could learn about and see on a field trip. So
Can you get there by Metro? You know, gas prices are right.
Well, maybe we'll do a poll, see how many people would actually trek down to Alexandria over the summer, but that's another idea. All right, well, thanks to everybody for coming in person. I would sort of staying a little bit, seeing if people want to come together in person, and everybody for joining online too. And we'll get the slides, and we'll post the slides and get those out to everybody.
Thank you, Dan.
All right, thanks for doing.
Yeah.
I need to introduce myself. I'm Allison. I just hadn't heard of your group before. I'm super fascinated by it. So
Which-
I'm with Leading Age Maryland. So we're an association, nonprofit.